takes a while to start. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you doing?
I'm good, and yourself?
Well, I'm pretty good as one can be on a Monday, and we're also joined today by Mr. John Endres. John, how are you?
Also very well, and once again, it's an exciting day in local and global politics, so lots to talk about.
Indeed, there is.
Interesting times.
Yeah.
Indeed. We are most certainly, the year of 2025 is shaping up to be a most interesting year, good and bad, for us. I just want to say that today's episode is sponsored by Hudaco Energy, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the show. But I think when I saw these two stories over the weekend, I thought to myself, this really actually is a bit of a week of disaster for South Africa. Things are just not going right, and unfortunately, these are self-inflicted problems to a large degree. Ones that I think the ANC in particular has inflicted on the country, mostly through poor decision-making and ideological quests. Well, what am I talking about? Let's start with the first one of these. And it began, as these things so often do, with a social media post, or a truth, as I believe they're called, on social media, on Donald Trump's social media network. Donald Trump truthed, South Africa is confiscating land and treating certain classes of people very badly. It is a bad situation that the radical left media doesn't want to so much as mention. Massive human rights violation at a minimum is happening for all to see. The United States won't stand for it. We will act. Also, I will be cutting off all future funding to South Africa until a full investigation of this situation has been completed. Well, South African government responded this morning with Minister of International Relations and Foreign Affairs, or Cooperation, whatever the title is, Ronald Ramola, saying, "We trust President Trump's advisors will leverage this investigation period to deepen their understanding of South Africa's policies as a constitutional democracy. Such insights will ensure a respectful and informed approach to our democratic commitments." President Ramaphosa tweeted, "South Africa is a constitutional democracy that is deeply rooted in the rule of law, justice, and equality. South African government has not confiscated any land. The recently adopted Expropriation Act is not a confiscation instrument, but a constitutionally mandated legal process that ensures public access to land in an equitable and just manner as guided by the Constitution. South Africa, like the United States of America and other countries, has always had expropriation laws that balance the need for public usage of land and the protection of rights of property owners. We look forward to engaging with the Trump administration over our land reform policy and issues of bilateral interest. We are certain that out of these engagements, we will share better and common understanding over these matters. The US remains a key strategic, political, and trade partner for South Africa. With the exception of PEPFAR aid, which constitutes 17% of South Africa's HIV program, there is no other funding that is received by South Africa from the United States." When this was announced by Trump on Truth Social, immediately in the, because this was in the middle of the night for South Africa on sort of early hours of Monday, South African rand slid 2% against the dollar in East Asia. The US has, over the last 20 years, given us about $8 billion in aid, mostly for PEPFAR, which is the program started by George W. Bush to help pay for antiretrovirals in poor African countries. That's about somewhere around 8 billion rand a year, I think, is the figure. So it's not a chunk of change you can ignore. Indeed, a lot of very poor South Africans who don't really have a lot of access to good healthcare infrastructure do get things from PEPFAR that actually save their lives. So it is quite a blow to them, their lives in particular, that this kind of funding is going to be cut off. Well, John, let me start with you. We did sort of warn, I think, the government that they would be putting us in a bad light overseas by engaging on this expropriation path. And it seems that that's very much come to pass. And yet the response still seems to be, nothing to see here, it's no big deal, don't believe your lying eyes. What do you make of this?
Well, for me, this is really a emperor has no clothes moment. This is a perfect analogy. So for the longest time, I think that our government and our president have pretended to be dressed in the most beautiful clothes of constitutional democracy and progressivism. But Donald Trump is the kid who points with his finger at the government, at the president, and says, "You are not wearing any clothes." And that is very embarrassing, very awkward to all those involved. I'm sure that all well-meaning democracies around the world look at this and are feeling embarrassed on South Africa's behalf. But ultimately, the kid that points to the emperor and says, "You've got no clothes," is playing a useful role. And that is exactly what he's doing. The expropriation story is one that I think the ANC was hoping would die down quietly, would go away. People would forget about it after a week or two. The news cycle would move on to other stories. And what Trump has done now is really to focus the glare of the world's attention straight on this. And it's going to make it very difficult for the ANC to pretend that there's nothing there. I think it is worthwhile also pointing out that the statements that have come out from DIRCO, so International Relations and Cooperative Governance, Cooperation Department, there we go, and also the president, are once again emperor no clothes moments. So they're sort of pretending that there's nothing to see. The emperor is still very splendid in his clothing, but as a matter of fact, as we know, the Expropriation Act is actually a threat to property rights and suffers from some very grave weaknesses that we've pointed out and that pose a big risk to South Africa's economy and to the prosperity of its citizens. Nick.
So, Terence, while we can say that sort of Ramaphosa and DIRCO's response is the kind of official line, I think what captures how the ANC actually feels about this is more accurately seen in Gwede Mantashe's comments to the Mining Indaba this morning, where he basically said he wasn't very worried about Trump's threats to us, saying Africa needs to accept its advantages and take charge of growing demand. I have ministers in my cabinet who always worry about geopolitics with this imminent threat that because we passed an expropriation act, Trump will withhold funding to South Africa. I say, let's not immobilize Africa. Let's withhold minerals from the US. That is it. If they don't give us money, let us not give them minerals. But the reality is they take our minerals, but they say they are withholding funding. No, we have minerals in the continent, and therefore we have something. We are not just beggars, said Gwede Mantashe to the applause. This is an aside, but I think this was a Times Live article that I'm quoting from here. Then has a paragraph that says the Expropriation Act, which Ramaphosa signed into law last month, makes no provision for the confiscation of land. Which, what? Yes, it does. But anyway, this word confiscation is making life a little bit complicated, I think, perhaps on some of this reporting. But Terence, sorry, at the same venue, Mantashe also bashed China for apparently exploiting us by buying too much of our chrome, then beneficiating it overseas, and then selling it back to us at terribly cheap prices, which is driving all of our chrome people out of business, something like that. So I see Gwede Mantashe has decided that South Africa's two largest trading partners need to be annoyed at the same time with criticism. But anyway, what do you make of this?
Yeah, look, anything that starts with there was a social media post, immediately like rings alarm bells. Back in the 15th century, King Charles VI sent Henry V of England a box of tennis balls, saying, "Don't challenge France, stay at home and play tennis." And Henry then sent him a box of cannonballs, saying this is how he's going to answer. There was some sort of finesse to that. Now we just grab our phone and like shout it into the ether. But the world is what it is. Okay, look, there's a couple of things going on here. I think the first thing to point out is that while Trump is, as I was actually saying to someone earlier this morning, pugilistic and mercurial, but I do think that there is a certain method to his feigned madness that he's trying to rattle a cage. I remember the whole Rocket Man thing with North Korea, and then he becomes the first American president to go and meet him. I suspect there's something going on here. I am, however, concerned that he's been very specific that they're going to halt funding at least until this investigation is completed, which does kind of give a back door. But that PEPFAR thing, if it's 17% of our health budget, that's a large portion, and there are people who depend on this for their lives. Now, I remember at one stage, George Bush, to many of the great and the good, may as well have had 666 tattooed on his forehead. But I think that this was, one of the most life-saving interventions in Africa, and I'm not sure that this really means a great deal to Trump, or at least he wants to pass this into what is transactional, and I think this is very short-sighted. It's the kind of thing that hits ordinary people and not the government. As far as Minister Montashe goes, I'm sure I have something for my ulcer here as I mention this. Look, there is a large difference between between receiving aid and selling minerals. Minerals are generally sold as part of a commercial transaction, which I'm not sure. As you're saying that if America doesn't accede to demands for foreign aid, South Africa will impose sanctions. Well, I imagine the amount of money you will lose simply in tax revenue from refusing to sell those goods will far outstrip anything that America could or would conceivably give. And if the Chinese are also no longer acceptable, although I imagine a stern phone call from Beijing will turn this around very quickly. I don't know. Words fail me. But you look, I think this all just demonstrates the sort of social media niveau of our of what passes for governance. This is a very serious moment, and I can tell you that in serious countries, Trump has waved his saber at a lot of people. I doubt very much in Ottawa or Copenhagen, or for that matter in Beijing, people are thinking that, oh yeah, we won't sell them stuff. Ha ha ha! Check how tough we are. I think they're pretty working well. What's the game plan? Our problem is we just don't have that sort of that sort of diplomatic capacity.
Yes, no, I think that's really accurate. Of course, the problem with the whole "we won't sell the minerals" thing is, well, firstly, South Africa's mining industry under Montashe has been so anemic, and so there's been so little growth that it's not exactly like we're pulling out ever-growing quantities of huge, valuable materials. But also, there's a country called Australia that exists, which outperforms us in mining massively. And if we're not going to provide minerals, well, the reality is people can go elsewhere. South Africa has a lot of great mineral resources, but we're not taking advantage of them, which means that we don't have leverage. If we had... Sorry, go ahead, Terence.
No, I just want to say, the other thing, of course, is that, the Chinese are beneficiating stuff. That is a skanda. We are closing down what remains of our refining capacity, go figure. And yes, I see there's a comment about Hazenile. We always have those Hazenile resources, don't we? Django caves, weren't they?
Yes, no, let's not revisit a particularly embarrassing moment in our national history. But yeah, so if we had 15 years of solid economic growth, where our mining industry had become the envy of the world, then Gwede Mantashe could stand on that stage and say, okay, well, if you're not going to play ball, we're not going to play ball with you. And it would mean something. But it doesn't, because he spent decades or years and years and years, like a decade, undermining the ability of South Africa's mining industry to stand up to global winds. We are in an economic crisis. Almost half of South Africans are unemployed. We have had anemic growth for very, very long time now. We don't have the cards to play here. I'm all for thumping your chest nationally when you can win, but man, we are not in a strong hand to win. On that front, though, John, I was talking to my father today, and he was reminded of previous times in South African history when patriotism was used to rally people behind the government, just in moments like this. And do you think there's a possibility that the ANC could spin this into a kind of nationalistic thing, blame the US for our problems if we do have problems with our economy not growing, and basically boosting their support by encouraging anger at the US? What do you make of that?
I think that's kind of an obvious play to make. But again, I'm not sure if the capacity is there to make it successfully in South Africa. I think broadly the population quite likes the United States, has increasingly lost confidence in its own government, and therefore is going to treat with cynicism and appropriate disdain the notion that we should attribute our own problems to the fault of the United States. So I think that play is not going to work very well here. So far, also, we haven't really seen attempts to make it work, I think. I think the South African response has been quite measured, but also looking a bit limp. And looking at Trump's communication style, that's full of bluster, of simple words, of exaggerations.
Looks like John's frozen.
I'm back now.
John, we lost you there for a second.
Yeah. So his speech is full of exaggerations and bluster, Donald Trump, that is. And I think really the purpose of it is often its instrumental use of communication. He's trying to achieve a reaction in his counterpart, and does that very successfully. He's very, I think, uncomfortable to deal with. You read his statements and you sort of cringe a little bit at the use of language and the hyperbole and the exaggerations and sort of the falsehoods. But I think it is all designed to put the counterparty on the back foot, force them to respond, and then gain information out of their response that then informs the next step. So it's very much an action-based approach to communication. It's not something that we're very familiar with. We sort of used to diplomatic language and how to read that and to understand what it means. And Trump has his own use of language, which is quite distinct. Nick?
So now it's time for me.
If I may say, just interesting
ahead,
that South Africa, a relatively minor player in the world, has come into his sights within 2 weeks of his inauguration. That's not a position you really want to be.
Yeah, exactly. I was actually just saying to one of our colleagues recently, we might escape things. He's picking so many fights in the world. We might escape his wrath unless Elon Musk sees a South Africa-related tweet. And well, Elon Musk saw a South Africa-related tweet recently, and this seems to be what followed. All right, so now it's time for me to annoy everyone who's been nodding along with the show so far by criticizing a little bit of what Trump said. And that is, what frustrates me about how he said it, firstly, is the is confiscating land thing. Well, not quite yet. That's what we're afraid of, is that they're going to start. So, but, whatever. Here's the bit that kind of irritates me. It's his second thing, and treating certain classes of people very badly. Now, in typical Trump fashion, that's a very vague statement. What does that mean? What are certain classes? Does he mean farmers? Does he mean landowners? Does he mean white people? I don't know. It could be any of those. But the point stands, I think, that framing of this debate, I think, is not a particularly helpful one. This is an attack not on people who own land, or not only on people who own land, not only on people who are white, not only on people who are on land that is facing some sort of land claim, whatever. This is an attack on all South Africans. The bill undermines the rights of every single one of us, not just those who already own things, because it gives the government power to exercise this authority over anyone. So people who run afoul in let's say a low-cost housing area, the bond houses, let's say on the edge of a informal settlement, there's, let's say, a corrupt cadre wants to develop a new shopping mall there, and so he gets his buddies to try and expropriate that land without compensation, and then the excuse will be given, oh, this is vital for developing the township economy, right? There are so many. That's the kind of problems this bill creates, is that because it's so open-ended, it just creates endless scope for abuse. this is not just a problem for a white commercial farmer who lives in Mpumalanga and has some large farm. This is a problem for all South Africans. Terence, do you agree with that criticism? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think bear something in mind. Trump has become, in certain quarters, a kind of messianic figure, and I think a lot of people get him wrong. I don't think he's particularly interested in South Africans' interests. The play is to make him think that what we can offer has a benefit for the United States and for him. So yeah, so there was apparently a Facebook group, Donald Trump will save South Africa. Well, Donald Trump is not going to be saving South Africa. Just no. Social media, guys, it gets to me. So yeah, and I think he's deliberately kind of sticking the knife in. I think that there probably are either specific or implied targets in this. But yeah, certain classes of people are treated very bad. I think everyone is treated very badly in this country.
Yes,
it's like, pick your poison. We're all treated badly in different ways. We're all treated badly. It's not like there's any kind of pet groups that sort of get an easy ride, except maybe if you're some sort of politically connected cadre.
Yeah, there's about 20 entrepreneurs who probably think they're getting a good ride, and everyone else is not having a great time. John, final thoughts on the story?
Yeah, just to agree with what you're saying. I think once again, as you said, like, his ambiguity is baked in. It's done on purpose. Like, which group is he talking about? But Terence's point is correctly made. With stagnating or declining real incomes in South Africa, with no growth, with high unemployment, with weakened property rights, like, everybody who lives here is affected by that, and being treated badly by the policies of the ANC government. And if Trump, through his interventions, manages to get a change going towards better outcomes, then we will be grateful. Nick.
Indeed. All right, so a quick word from our sponsor, Hudaco Energy. They say, are you tired of skyrocketing electricity bills and the new phenomenon of load reduction? Meet Hudaco Energy, South Africa's trusted Tier 1 premium solar and backup power solutions supplier. With over 100 years of trading experience and the backing of a publicly listed company, Hudaco Energy brings you the best quality international products to power your home or business reliably. From 3 kilowatt single-phase systems to 250 kilowatt three-phase solutions, they've got options for every need. And the best part is they offer unbeatable financing and rent-to-own packages designed to lower the barriers to saving money, cutting electricity costs, and ensuring power stability, regardless of what's happening at Eskom. Right now, they're thrilled to offer Daily Friend listeners an exclusive promotion. Book a free business or household audit, and they'll show you how to put money back in your pocket without hefty upfront costs. Reach out to them at sales@hudacoenergy.co.za. That's HUDACO Energy, or one word, .co.za, or call them on 011 447 9864. Hudaco Energy, sustainable power and storage solutions provider. Okay, so let's talk about the second disaster that we are being faced with, and that is something we did talk a little bit about last week, and that is what's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, I'd heard some rumors about this being the situation, but quite frankly, I didn't quite believe it because I thought it was too shocking. We've seen a lot of assurances from the government that the situation in DRC is under control, that our soldiers are not really in any harm's way, that this is all being sorted out, and that indeed, and that the government is working on a solution to the problem, and that more South African soldiers are not going to be killed there. Well, there was a reporting in, I think it was originally in a report, and then it was followed up by a story in City Press over the weekend, where quotes from soldiers who are actually on the ground there were published, and it is quite shocking, to say the least. This is me reading from the City Press story. By late this week, South African troops were effectively prisoners or hostages of the M23 rebels after bloody battles during the rebels' advance at Goma. Conversations with the soldiers there tell a different story to the official one. This is a quote from one of the soldiers who was talking to the media. He said, "We are completely on our own. It feels like my soul is leaving my body. If someone could just shoot me and get it over with, I know it will happen someday, so the sooner the better." I think it's fair to say that morale at least among some of those soldiers, is pretty low. The soldier was part of a group who unsuccessfully defended the town of Goma and their base against the rebels last week, which saw 13 South Africans being killed. Another soldier speaking to the media said, "There's no plan here. The bad guys are in our camp. We can do nothing. There's just a white flag." Ammunition supplies became critically low at the base. A truck that was delivering new supplies from one of the other bases was destroyed in a rebel ambush. The rebels have shut down the cell networks, which means that most of the South African soldiers are not able to talk to anyone. And in fact, the media has not been able to communicate with the soldiers who they were previously talking to. They only have satellite phones still available. In Goma, there are still some South African soldiers who are guarding the building, which is the UN Peacekeeping Force's main offices. However, it looks like effectively the entire force are prisoners of the of the M23 soldiers and their Rwandan allies. Another soldier speaking to the media said, quote, "All of our movements must be approved by them," speaking about the rebels. "They are in control of Goma, the airport, and our headquarters. Rwandan soldiers are guarding us 24/7. Only our radios work, but they listen on the radio conversations. We are allowed only to do certain things at certain times. We have our weapons, but we are not allowed to carry them. They are just to prevent looters if they try to steal our stuff. We are not allowed to drive any vehicle mounted with a weapon, any unauthorized movement, and they threaten to shoot us. We are currently getting water from the Uruguay Army's peacekeeping force unit next door. There's still food and storage, enough for porridge in the morning and one meal a day. The soldiers are constantly very worried because they receive no instruction or information from a high authority. They're also uncertain about what will happen next." The soldier went on to say, "I would say most of the soldiers are relatively safe because the Rwandans have told them they have no problems with South Africans. Apparently also the base's septic tanks are full, which is not great if you're trying to maintain good health in your base." Well, this to me, Terence, sounds like a massive military disaster. We have just under 3,000 army personnel deployed to that area, supposed to be supporting the government of the DRC. And it now looks like, while it may not be explicit, that they are all effectively under the control of the Rwandan army and are not allowed to carry their weapons unless they are given permission so by the Rwandans. This kind of seems like a catastrophic military defeat, probably, to my mind, and I speak under correction here, the worst defeat of South African forces since the surrender at Tobruk during the Second World War. What do you make of this?
Yeah. Well, in Tobruk, the Second South African Division surrendered, I think it was 10,800 troops. If this is 2,000, bearing in mind that South Africa maintains a much smaller peacetime military, yesterday John and I were back and forth on this, and I was disputing the term prisoner. But the more I read about this, I'm not sure what else you call it. Interned, but effectively they were under the control of an armed group with which they were previously fighting. You could maybe find some sort of precedent in the sort of 1700s where you get to carry your muskets and your flags back to your home country. But yeah, the point is that they cannot operate autonomously. They cannot, they have no military agency. So yeah, I think that when the history of this is written, this will probably rank alongside Tobruk. I think maybe the difference is that in the early 1940s, people kind of understood that the Afrika Korps was a formidable, household name and something that pretty much every South African would have known. This, M23, DRC, South African Stabilization Force, that's something that happens, on a very distinct, web page of News 24. It's not something that most of us think about, but this is, this gets at South Africa's security dilemmas, underfunding, deployments, without the support. I've said this to you on the show last week. With an army, either make sure it's combat worthy, properly supplied, properly trained, properly supported, or don't have it. Do not use it as a kind of as a bargaining chip that you can put into the field, because people will die.
John, my initial analysis of this is that South Africa's credibility as a regional power in Africa is kind of shot through on this one. We've just demonstrated that our military couldn't do what it was asked to do. And I don't see why we're going to be able to have serious influence in DRC or really in many of the countries around us for a long time, unless Ramaphosa can somehow pull a cat out of the bag on this one and reverse the situation. But he doesn't seem particularly concerned with that right now.
Yeah, I think it's another emperor has no clothes moment, where South Africa like to appear on the African stage as if it had a formidable fighting force and was going to, could deal with all comers. And this has now been shown to be false. Just a rebel
Sorry,
group can win.
Just to add to that, we fought M23 and the Rwandan backers back in 2013, and from all accounts, as far as I can tell, and I speak under correction once again, we were pretty effective. So this isn't even like, 10 years ago, South Africa could still apparently deal with this force. Not so this time.
Yeah, and I think it's as Terence has pointed out.
I think we're frozen again.
Yeah, I'm back again.
There you go.
About that.
Go ahead.
I'm taken prisoner.
Yes, exactly, by my bad internet connection. But as you pointed out, Terence, this is a question of, I think, of criminal negligence and recklessness in not equipping your troops properly and sending them out into a misadventure like this, and sort of, just setting them off to be killed. It's a really terrible thing. And I think, if I do think that the government has a lot to account for on this, and I hope it will be held to account, even though I think, have seen that parliamentary oversight has not been very strong on this deployment. I think that Parliament doesn't really know what's going on, why it's happening, how much it's going to cost, how long it will last, what the point of it is, why are we in the DRC, and it's these soldiers who are paying the price for that, for underfunding, not taking war seriously. And if there's anything you have to take seriously in life, I think it is combat fighting. You can't get away with pretending.
If I can just add to that, what I think 13 South Africans were killed last week, and if you go back to the Central African Republic, the Battle of Bangui, I think we also had 13 casualties or something in that region. Those are the kind of casualties that conventional armies get in a day of fighting. I'm referring here to actual combatants. That's kind of what a U.S. Marine battalion going through a city in Iraq would maybe take in a bad day. Most of the other numbers are made up by civilians and whatever. But the point is that this is the kind of conventional war level level spread of casualties. It's not about and this is something that needs to be clearly understood.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I see someone commented that it's 14 dead, and I think that's correct. I think someone did die of their wounds later, unfortunately. Someone who was killed in a mortar attack. But this is, just a very bad day for South Africa, I think, or a very bad start to the year. And I think, as you say, John, we've really seen the exposure of the ANC and Ramaphosa's leadership as being just hollow. He just doesn't have, it seems, any kind of real strategy for how to turn South Africa's fortunes around or how to deal with these numerous and complicated crises. You can't just waffle your way through and breeze in on a cloud, pretending like everything's hunky-dory. You actually have to commit resources and attention to these things. You can't just sweet talk everyone. And I think that it's very important for the government to come under a lot of pressure on both of these stories. The expropriation bill is disastrous for our country, and having a huge portion of our troops captured by a foreign country in an overseas deployment is also a huge disaster. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. We hope you found the show interesting, and we'll be back tomorrow with the Daily Fringe Show. Cheers, everyone.